Oh boy, a lot to get to today. Karl Anthony Towns reportedly heading to the New York Knicks in exchange for Dante DiVincenzo and, of course, Julius Randle. We also have NFL, my Week 4 thoughts and predictions coming up, plus a little bit about some of those college football games last night between Georgia and Alabama in particular. Oh man, that was a wild ball game. Georgia came all the way back, and it might have been for nothing. Plus, Ohio State taking down Michigan State easily. Along with some Guardians, I was at the game last night against the Houston Astros. It was essentially AAA baseball, but it's all okay because the playoff bracket is set. All that and more on today's Raw Takes. Like I said, a lot to get to today, so we're going to get right to it in just a second. But make sure to like and subscribe for more updates on YouTube, and check me out on social media. Twitter/X, Hoty Andrew, Instagram at Hoty Raw Takes, and Facebook Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. So, where do I even begin? I think we're going to start really with what's fresh right now, and then we'll head into a little bit more details on the show with other things, such as Week 4 in the NFL. And we'll start off with basketball because regular season hasn't started yet, so we don't have too much detail to go into. But we haven't talked basketball yet here on Raw Takes much, so let's get right to it. Karl Anthony Towns reportedly heading to the New York Knicks in exchange for Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. That move, to me, I think says a lot about the direction the New York Knicks are really ready to go. I think they're essentially starting to become a team that's going into championship or bust mode. I think they still have a piece that they may need if you include Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns. There still feels like there's a missing piece somewhere there, but that is two superstar players on what is a loaded roster with a very good head coach in Tom Thibodeau. Now, with that being said, would I take the New York Knicks to be finals contenders right away? I don't think so. I think Milwaukee's going to bounce back next year, and we see the Bucks in serious contention. I think we also have to look at the Boston Celtics contending for another title going back-to-back. They're a loaded roster, and many of their players aren't going anywhere. The Cleveland Cavaliers are contenders, but I wouldn't say they're finals contenders. I think they could win a playoff series or two. I'm not a big fan of the fact they didn't move any of the core four, but bringing in Kenny Atkinson is a little bit of a breath of fresh air for the offensive perspective. I think J.B. Bickerstaff is a really good defensive coach, but Kenny Atkinson could be a great offensive coach, but I was still kind of questioning the J.B. Bickerstaff move. I have a lot more questions than answers about the Cleveland Cavaliers. But with that being said, you look at a move like Karl Anthony Towns coming over to the Eastern Conference. That loads up this Eastern Conference even more. And I haven't even gotten into teams like the Orlando Magic, who look like they're up and coming. They still have a ways away, I think. But Paolo Banchero, clearly being a future superstar player, puts the Orlando Magic in great shape. And I had experience watching them with the Cavaliers this past spring. But I like the direction the Orlando Magic are going. And I also want to include the Miami Heat in the Eastern Conference mix. Jimmy Butler is still there. You look at players such as Bam Adebayo, who's still really good. The Miami Heat have a great culture, and they're going to be contending for a championship yet again. Believe me on that. So I think the Eastern Conference just gets more loaded with this move. I think the New York Knicks are better because of it. I kind of question what Minnesota's going for here, but I don't think Minnesota's necessarily in bad position. I think they realize their best player is Anthony Edwards now, and they need to really build more so around him as opposed to Karl Anthony Towns, which I think was their original direction. But look, they still have Rudy Gobert on that roster. I think adding Julius Randle brings you a great offensive edge from the Knicks' perspective, and a veteran in the NBA. He could bring some great scoring abilities to the Minnesota Timberwolves, which they need, and they lacked in that series against the Dallas Mavericks. I think they were so gassed by the Denver Nuggets series in the playoffs last year. We saw the Minnesota Timberwolves kind of just fall apart by the time they got to the Dallas Mavericks because their heart and soul and the way the team was constructed was to beat Denver, not really those offensively explosive teams such as a Dallas Mavericks team. I think if Minnesota would have gone to the finals, that would have been a different situation with the Boston Celtics, but that's never here or there. I'm just saying the Minnesota Timberwolves, I think, really need some more offensive production, and I think Julius Randle is a player that could bring you that. I think offensively, he's got some great skill and can make more space for Anthony Edwards to really just go off and be Anthony Edwards. I think Karl Anthony Towns kind of limits that, to be quite honest with you. I think Rudy Gobert being a great defensive player, really helps the Minnesota Timberwolves block on all cylinders. So I think this move could actually be a win-win for both teams. The New York Knicks, I think, are definitely a lot better because of this deal, and I think the Minnesota Timberwolves are fine as is, and this could create more space for Anthony Edwards to be Anthony Edwards. So my opinion on this deal is it should end up being okay, and this is all reported as I'm recording this, so this is not an official deal yet. But if Karl Anthony Towns, as we believe, because it's been reported he's going to the New York Knicks, goes to the New York Knicks, I think that is a great move for the Knicks to really contend for championships. It worries me about my Cavs because the Knicks essentially own my Cavs right now. But you also look at the fact Minnesota being this close to an NBA Finals appearance, that's going to really help them out. So I think we are really in a position right now where we see the Minnesota Timberwolves elevate their game a little bit offensively, and I think we see the New York Knicks try to compete with the big teams like Boston and Milwaukee. But for me, this is a win-win for both the Knicks and the Timberwolves. So let's talk a little bit about Ohio State. The Buckeyes took down Michigan State easily. Easily. It wasn't even close. 38-7. It was bye week number 5. Well, other than that, it was a good game. I think Will Howard really ran the offense smoothly. The defense for Ohio State is playing nasty. Wow. Ryan Day has the horses riding, and this team is going so far according to plan. Now, obviously, as I've said numerous times, it all comes down to what the Buckeyes do against teams like Oregon, Penn State, and Michigan. But other than that, everything went Ohio State's way yesterday. They have good history up in East Lansing. I believe they haven't lost there since 1999. So Ohio State's really smooth sailing when it comes to the Michigan State Spartans. It was a much-needed win. Goes on the resume. They had a great celebration yesterday in the locker room. I actually reshared the video. It was awesome. So I think Ohio State is in really good shape, and they're going to remain one of the top programs, of course, in the country, and hopefully win the Big Ten this year. But as I said before, nothing about any of it is still getting me to be sold on the fact they can beat Michigan, because that's what this season's going to come down to. Now, Michigan State was a pretty good opponent. They, in terms of the Big Ten standard, of course, they came off a tough loss to Boston College, where Boston College beat them 23-19. So Michigan State, I'd say, is one of the better Big Ten opponents Ohio State's going to have outside of Penn State, Oregon, and Michigan. So the fact that they rolled them that easily is a really good sign that Ohio State has a lot of good things to come. Ryan Day, I think, has gotten this program on the right track a little bit more than I expected this year. But honestly, when I look at the game against Marshall and I see the game against Michigan State, my cause for concern is they kind of rolled over to Marshall early on in that game. And then obviously Ohio State got it out of hand offensively towards the end. They weren't able to do the same kind of offensive damage against Michigan State. But Michigan State couldn't do the same kind of offensive damage that Marshall did early on in the game last week. So the scores are kind of telling. I think Michigan State was in a much closer game than the box score says, too. At one point, that game probably should have been down to one possession. So other than that, Ohio State gets the win. They're moving on in Big Ten play, and we'll have to see what they do next week. The main game, though, I think was a story of yesterday. And this is the best college and pro game of the year so far. I combine both of them in this sense because that's how good this game was. Georgia and Alabama. Unbelievable. Alabama, I believe, was up 30-7 at one point. The fourth quarter comes around, and all of a sudden, Georgia just gets long touchdown, and long touchdown. And then Jalen Milroe for Alabama was able to throw a dart at the end of the right hand of the field. And in Tuscaloosa just started partying when that extra touchdown happened because it was 41-34 at that point. And then an interception ended the game. Carson Beck, I think, threw for a lot of yards yesterday, but those interceptions were pretty much the telling factor in this one. And Georgia has struggled historically against Alabama under Kirby Smart, but nobody else. So there may be some questions there of why Georgia can't figure out against Alabama. But they've really struggled against them. And obviously Georgia's now going to go down in the rankings because of it. But man, oh man, they kept that game close. And that was one for the ages. What a ball game that took place in Tuscaloosa yesterday. We'll keep it at football next. My Week 4 predictions are coming up. And we'll start off with my Cleveland Browns and Las Vegas Raiders. Alright, to say the least that these two teams aren't coming off embarrassing losses is an understatement. I mean, the Browns got crunched by the Giants early on in that game. They made it close by the second half, and the defense totally shut them down. But like I mentioned in the last Raw Takes, Deshaun Watson was good in terms of finding chemistry with Amari Cooper, but I didn't see anything significant that elevated his game. nothing significant that elevated his game. Now, I will also say he wasn't terrible in the game. I'm kind of a mixed bag on saying we saw some flashes of old Deshaun Watson, but we also saw the Deshaun Watson we've come to get used to in the Dallas Cowboys game in that game. But I don't put the loss completely on him. He had very little time to throw the football because DeJuan Jones has been awful at tackle. Just absolutely an abysmal performance from him all season long so far. We saw a lot better when Bill Callahan was the offensive line coach, so that may be the loss for the Browns in that aspect of things. And it's a former Buckeye too in DeJuan Jones. It pains me to say that because he had such a good season last year. And you also look at the fact that you had dumb penalties again and again and again. So the Browns are honestly just a stupid team. They need to pull their head out of their butts and get back on track and have plays from players like Greg Newsome where you're getting head-to-head contact. You can't do that. Those plays got to get out the window because that ball would have been turned over easily. Daniel Jones threw a pick, and we likely have points on that drive. Stupid penalties cost us. Stupid offensive line play essentially is costing us. The Browns have to figure it out. And what better way to get things figured out by a team that just lost to the Carolina Panthers in a blowout? Obviously, Andy Dalton had a lack of film. That's why it result in the Raiders losing to the Panthers, but that was embarrassing last week. They just came off a win against the Baltimore Ravens. They pulled Gardner Minshew in that game, which I actually thought was ridiculous because Gardner Minshew, I think overall, has been playing very well. The Raiders have no running game whatsoever, so you have to take advantage of that if you're the Browns defense, and I think they will. The other big thing is no Max Crosby. You have no Devontae Adams either, so the biggest weapon is not going to be on the offense, and the pass rush is not going to be there on the defense. Having said that, we don't think the Giants have a great defense, but that pass rush on the Giants last week looked really good with that offensive line play. So even though there's no Max Crosby, which is a big relief for the Browns, that's not going to necessarily mean they're not coming for Deshaun Watson because that offensive line play stinks. It stinks. So Deshaun Watson's going to have to throw the ball quickly. I say throw some short passes. Take a little bit of a risk. Get Amari Cooper on a slant route like we saw the first play of the game. Deshaun Watson got that play right from scrimmage for a 7-point lead early with Amari Cooper. So we know that there's some chemistry there. I want to see more of that this week against the Las Vegas Raiders. Get the ball to Amari Cooper fast. Deshaun Watson has to do that. I think he can. The offensive line is not going to be helpful whatsoever, but I'm still taking the Browns to win this game. I just think the Raiders are in a little bit of a hellhole because they lost to the Panthers in a blowout, and they're down 2 star players. 2 star players. And Gardner Minshew, if you can get in his head, is a very average quarterback. I still think he's pretty good for being a journeyman guy, but overall he's very average. Get in his head a little bit on the defense, get the offense rolling. The Browns should win this game 20-14 over the Las Vegas Raiders. Nice divisional matchup tomorrow between the New Orleans Saints and the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons, I think, have been playing kind of with house money the last couple games. They beat Philadelphia, so I think there is some good play in the Falcons. They have a lot of talent. I still think Kirk Cousins is really good. I think Bijan Robinson is a great weapon to have at your disposal. Mooney has made some plays this year, and it's overall a decent offensive team. Defensively, I think they were pretty good against Kansas City last week, but Kansas City wasn't really Kansas City. So I think the Falcons did a good job trying to limit them, but it just wasn't enough as the Chiefs ended up taking the game. So I actually like Atlanta to win this game because they're at home. New Orleans is coming off kind of an emotional loss to the Philadelphia Eagles. And I just think New Orleans is coming down to earth a little bit. I still think the Saints are really good. But to me, Atlanta just feels like they're more in a rhythm right now. So I'm going to take the Falcons over the Saints tomorrow. Let's say 13-7 in a low-scoring game. Rams and Bears. The Rams coming off a huge comeback win against San Francisco. And if they started 0-3, they may have been cooked for the season. And they had a pretty reasonable loss, I would say, to the Detroit Lions to start the year. The Lions were just a better team, and they won in overtime. So I like the Rams in this game just because I like nothing about the Bears right now. I think we start to see Caleb Williams make some strides in developing into an okay quarterback. But I still am a belief that Caleb Williams will eventually be a bust. So we may see some good things in Chicago from Caleb Williams as he starts to get used to NFL play. But the Los Angeles Rams, by far, are the much better team. The Minnesota Vikings are on cloud 9 right now. That comes back down to earth, regardless if Jordan Love plays or not. I like Green Bay in this game, even if it is Malik Willis. Malik Willis opened my eyes a little bit more last week. He could be a pretty good backup in the NFL. Sam Darnold, I think, is a backup in the NFL, and it's just been on cloud 9 the last 3 weeks because we saw Minnesota have a great weapon like Justin Jefferson, and they really just started to take off because of an easy opening schedule with opponents they're kind of familiar with. I mean, I hate to say it, but I think Sam Darnold is very familiar with the Shanahan systems. And we saw that with DeMeco Ryans being the head coach in Houston last week, and we saw that with Kyle Shanahan being the head coach of the 49ers, a team where Sam Darnold played. So he's very familiar with Shanahan's schemes. You're going to get a Matt LaFleur scheme here. So I think Green Bay is going to actually win this game in a divisional fight. I think it'll be a little close. Let's say 17-14 Green Bay, low scoring. Sam Darnold comes back down to earth a little bit like I think the Minnesota Vikings are. No part of me believes they're going to remain undefeated this season. I think they're fraudulent. So I'm going to take Green Bay to overtake Minnesota tomorrow. Pittsburgh Steelers, Indianapolis Colts in Indianapolis. I actually like the Colts in this game. They're 1-2. I think Pittsburgh has kind of been on cloud 9 as well, but I think the Steelers are more legit than a team like the Minnesota Vikings. I still think we're going to see Anthony Richardson continue to leap up. We saw it week 1 against the Houston Texans. I guess that's the best flash we saw of Anthony Richardson, but hey, they have Jonathan Taylor running the football, and he runs it really well. Steelers defense could kind of get exposed a little bit with that. We haven't seen them be terrific against the running game. They've been okay. And T.J. Watt is possibly an MVP right now because he has just been flying through the offensive lines of some easier opponents to open the season. The Chargers, I think, offensive line-wise, is a little bit better than the other 2 teams they played. But still, T.J. Watt's been on fire, and Justin Fields is starting to figure things out slowly, but there's still going to be hiccups in the road. I'm going to take the Indianapolis Colts to win this game at home. I just think we see more from Anthony Richardson, and it's kind of a much-more-needed win for Indy as opposed to a much more needed win for Pittsburgh. They're in good shape either way, win or lose tomorrow, because everybody else in the AFC North has at least 2 losses. Denver Broncos at New York Jets. I like the Jets in this game. They're at home. I think the Broncos started to find a little bit of rhythm offensively. I don't think Tampa Bay truly saw what they had coming in their loss last week. And I think Baker Mayfield kind of went back down to earth a little bit. He turned the ball over. He made some mistakes. He kind of reverted back to the Baker Mayfield we all seem to know from his Cleveland days. With that being said, though, I still think the Buccaneers are a good team. But we'll get to the Buccaneers in a little bit. I think Denver was kind of on cloud 9 with that offensive performance last week. I think they come back down to earth playing the Jets defense. The Jets defense isn't going to let that happen. And Aaron Rodgers will make enough plays to win this game. Give me the Jets over the Denver Broncos. Philadelphia Eagles at Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Part of me says this is a Philadelphia Eagles revenge game because of what happened in the playoffs last year. I mean, the Buccaneers just torched them. Absolutely torched them. So I want to take Philly to win this game because of that revenge factor, but part of me just says Tampa is the better group right now. I like Tampa. I think I'm going to take the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think Baker Mayfield wants to rebound from the performance he had last week. He wants to get back on track and show that he's the Baker Mayfield we all know from the first and second week of the season where they got a statement win over the Detroit Lions, for crying out loud. So I think Tampa Bay wants to make another statement here. I think they're going to get the win in a little bit more of a high-scoring game. Let's go 28-24 Tampa Bay over the Philadelphia Eagles. All right, you could determine if this is a Andy Dalton revenge game, and because of that, I kind of like that factor here. We haven't seen much film on Andy Dalton in a while, and Carolina's offense looked like they could do no wrong, and Cincinnati's defense looks like crap. They really, really do. They look like crap. They were awful against Washington, a rookie quarterback. I truly think Carolina is awful, and this is a must-win game for Cincinnati. But right now, I don't think Cincinnati is in any shape to go to the postseason. So I'm actually going to pick Carolina to beat the Cincinnati Bengals in an Andy Dalton-esque revenge game over Joe Burrow. Just because I think Cincinnati's a mess right now. They do a lot of chirping, and they don't back it up with play. They're a soft football team. Joe Burrow, to me, I think is the only hard player on that team right now that's playing tough and rough and getting that offense going. They're a soft football team right now. So I like Carolina because they showed me a little bit more edge against the Raiders than Cincinnati has shown me all year. Jacksonville at Houston. Believe it or not, even though Jacksonville's 0-3, this is definitely a must-win game. I thought Doug Peterson would get fired after last week's loss, But Jacksonville has had some fair success playing against the Houston Texans in Houston, and this game is in Houston. So I'm going to take the Jags tomorrow over the Texans. Texans got destroyed by Minnesota last week. I think they're going to take a little bit of time to recover from it. Give me the Jags over the Texans, and I think the Jags slowly start to find their way back into the division race a little bit. I still think the Jags have a lot of questions to answer, but I still think they could do so, and I think Doug Peterson's a good enough coach where he can rebound from bad starts. But with that being said, if the Houston Texans do end up winning this game, Doug Peterson's got to go. All right, Commanders-Cardinals. I like Arizona in this game because I like what I saw from them against the Rams. Not a divisional opponent, but this is still a rookie quarterback who's starting to figure things out. Feeling a lot more confident after beating the Cincinnati Bengals handedly, essentially, because the Bengals' defense is terrible. Let's just point that out. They're awful. It's not the offense that's really problematic. Joe Burrow's getting the ball to the receivers. You could say the offense for Cincinnati was bad against New England, but against Kansas City and Washington, it definitely wasn't. Washington's defense clearly a little flawed too because they did let Cincinnati come back in that game a little bit. Dan Quinn's kind of got to pencil in some holes there. So for me, I'm going to take Arizona because we still haven't seen enough from Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr., and we know Marvin Harrison Jr. can do some significant damage from what we saw in the Rams game. I think we're going to see a little bit more chemistry from those two. So let's see the Arizona Cardinals take over the Washington Commanders tomorrow. We obviously know what the San Francisco 49ers are. And they're 1-2 right now, so I don't think they're going to start 1-3. They're going to easily beat the New England Patriots. We know they like to get blown out by the New York Jets. The New York Jets are finally dominating the Patriots. Who would have ever thought we'd see the day? Not in the Tom Brady era, that's for sure. But I'll take the 49ers easily over the Patriots. Divisional matchup between the Chiefs and the Chargers. Justin Herbert, as I'm recording this, is still questionable. I kind of like the Chargers if Justin Herbert's in and healthy. They did kind of blow the game to the Pittsburgh Steelers last week, but to me, if Justin Herbert's healthy, I think Jim Harbaugh knows Andy Reid very well. It's a divisional matchup, and the Chargers are at home. So I'm going to take the Chargers with a healthy Justin Herbert. If not, I see the Chiefs rolling on and possibly heading to that 17-0 season I discussed earlier on Raw Takes this week. Bills and Ravens will round out the Sunday night lineup. I like Buffalo to possibly roll the Ravens a little bit. That offense looks stellar right now. And like I mentioned before, Ken Dorsey, looking at the Browns offense, has a lot of questions to answer because we see that Buffalo offense take off without Ken Dorsey. So that leads me to believe is Ken Dorsey probably an offensive liability. With that being said, though, I'm actually going to take the Ravens in this game. The Ravens, though, they're a little streaky because that defense was pretty poor against the Dallas Cowboys late in that game. But I think the Ravens, if they get off to an early lead, they could bury Buffalo a little bit and force Buffalo to come back. I think Buffalo is very capable of coming back. So this game will be very interesting to watch tomorrow night. But having said that, to me, there's just something about the Ravens I feel more comfortable about picking them in this game than Buffalo. And I think it's because they need to get to 2-2, and it's urgent for them so they could start chasing the Pittsburgh Steelers down. And Buffalo, we really haven't seen them play the Baltimore Ravens too much the last couple seasons because Cincinnati's been at the top of the division. So they haven't played each other, I think, since 2021 or 22. So I think it's going to be crucial that we see the Baltimore Ravens get a win over Buffalo because I think they need it more than Buffalo does. Buffalo could take the L here. I'm going with Baltimore. All right, the Tennessee Titans and Miami Dolphins. Now, I read a report about Tyler Huntley joining the Dolphins or something. I'm not too sure, but that would be an okay move for them. They definitely need a quarterback. Until I see their quarterback situation get figured out, though, I don't know if Tyler Huntley signed with the Dolphins. I thought I read that earlier. That could be a rumor. I don't want to speculate. So I'm not too sure what that whole situation is down there. But I think Tennessee they're hungry for a win. I think Tennessee wins this game just in spite of the fact that Miami Dolphins have some very significant questions at quarterback. And until they get them figured out, I don't see the Dolphins winning football games. Seattle Seahawks are undefeated. The Detroit Lions, they're hosting them at home. Now, Seattle has beaten them the last couple of years. I believe they beat them in 2022 and 2023. I know they beat them in overtime last year. I watched the ending of that game. So I think the Seattle Seahawks kind of have the Detroit Lions number a little bit, but I think Dan Campbell also knows that, and I think he's going to be telling these guys in the locker room, hey, listen, this is an opportunity to get a team that's had our GOAT for the last couple of years. Let's go get them. I like Detroit at home to beat the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle Seahawks kind of a little bit overachieving right now, too. Nobody thought they were going to be 3-0, and they had a really easy schedule to start the year. So give me Detroit over the Seattle Seahawks to overcome a team that's had their number the last couple of seasons. All right, Cleveland Guardians. I was at the game last night. It was essentially AAA baseball in terms of the lineups. Will Brennan was leading off for the Guardians, and Houston did not start off Jose Altuve just as much as we didn't start off Steven Kwan after he got back from the injured list. So it really was maybe let's just scout both of these teams. This is a likely ALDS preview, depending on how the brackets go. So far, it looks like we have the bracket set. I think the main thing that could switch is Detroit and Kansas City could flip. I think Kansas City might have the season series, but I have to double check that. That's going to be the big thing. So the Guardians now can't clinch the number one seed because the New York Yankees did lose, but because the Guardians lost, there's no way they can overcome New York because of the tiebreaker. So New York will have the first round bye. Having said that, that's totally fine with me. I think I'm much more worried about can the Guardians get out of the ALDS before I even worry about the ALCS. But the two teams that the Guardians struggled with this year out of the playoff field, well, technically three teams they struggled with. They struggled with Kansas City. They struggled with Detroit to a degree, but they still ended up winning the season series. They didn't really struggle with Baltimore, and they struggled with Houston a little bit early on in the year when they played Houston in Houston. So that kind of concerns me a little bit. And Detroit just got red hot. That's also pretty much why I'm concerned about them. And yeah, and the New York Yankees, definitely we have not played them overall very well. Now, we fought in a lot of the New York Yankees games, and we fought in extra innings to get the 2 wins we had. So I'm not going to just say that I'm pessimistic that they can't compete with the Yankees, because the Yankees are playing a 2-man lineup with Soto and Judge. But the Guardians have a long way to go. I think it's going to be very, very tough for them to even get to the ALCS, let alone get out of the ALDS, especially if they get Houston or Detroit. I do not want anything to do with the Tigers right now. The Tigers got a hot hand and they're playing with house money. No one thought they were going to get this far. So the Tigers are dangerous. I also think Houston's dangerous just because of their history. They have not been in the ALCS since 2017. 2017, every year the Houston Astros have been there. Now, they haven't won every ALCS series, but they've been in the mix for a while now. So I'm always concerned about playing the Houston Astros based on history. The New York Yankees, obviously they're the Yankees. We've struggled with them in our last playoff meetings. I don't think we've won a playoff series against them since 2007. I remember 2017 when we played them in a 5-game series and my heart was broken because that was the year we won 22 games. So to me it is going to be a really challenging task for the Guardians to even get out of the ALDS. Having said that, this season is a success. I want to emphasize that this season has been very successful for the Guardians, regardless of the playoff outcome. Anything in the playoff outcome is honestly the cherry on top. It really, really is. It's extra sugar on a Sunday. If they could even get to the ALCS. No one thought they were even going to be here. No one thought at the beginning of the season this team was going to even make the playoffs, let alone win the division. And they won the division, so that was kind of like an extra step in the right direction. The season was already a success. I think there's a lot to build upon for next year, regardless. Having said that, though, baseball is different. You don't necessarily make the playoffs every year, so take advantage of the opportunities when they present themselves. The Guardians have a great chance to make a deep postseason run, and hopefully they're able to do so. But I have my doubts because that rotation is still streaky. The bullpen, I think, might get a little gassed, but I still think the bullpen will be locked in by the end of ball games. And you also have to take in consideration that the lineup hasn't necessarily been as good as it was in May and June. Now, some guys have stepped up when other guys faltered. Steven Kwan and David Fry have not been the same after the All-Star break. I'll just point that out right away. Those two guys have not been the same. But guys who have stepped up, you look at Lane Thomas, he stepped up pretty big. Andres Jimenez has stepped up. Brian Rocchio has come a little bit of a long way. Kyle Manzardo went back up and down from AAA Columbus a few times. And Kyle Manzardo has had his moments, but he's a streaky player. I'm not so sure how much we're going to play him in playoff games. It's going to be an interesting series, the way the ALDS goes, if the Guardians win it or not. Because I'll be honest with you, as I said, anything beyond the point we're at right now is cherry on the Sunday. But you have an opportunity, and you have to take advantage of it. And like I mentioned before, the Antonetti era needs a World Series title in order to validate it. They need a World Series title. It doesn't matter what it takes. And when you look at teams like Houston's rotation, a pitcher like Framber Valdez could be a little concerning. Justin Verlander, we were able to hit off him a little bit yesterday. He's still Justin Verlander, but he's not the same guy he once was. And we've played him so many times based on his days with Detroit. You also have to look at teams like the New York Yankees. Their pitching staff is essentially led by Garrett Cole, but their pitching staff is very okay. There's not many great pitchers on the New York Yankees this year, and their bullpen is streaky. That's going to be the New York Yankees' biggest flaw, is they could blow games late in the ball game. And I also think it's going to be important to look at teams like Baltimore, a team you've had their numbers. Maybe you got to avoid pitching to Gunnar Henderson, but you've been able to hit off Baltimore pretty well. But you also had Logan Allen pitching in one of those wins, and Logan Allen was absolutely awful this year. So, I don't know if the Guardians are going to have the same kind of luck they had with the Baltimore Orioles, because the Orioles' offense is good. But when you look at the season as a whole, they played them very well. And Kansas City has been a struggle. Seth Lugo's a tough guy to hit off of, and you have to look at players like Bobby Witt Jr., you have to look at Salvador Perez, probably one of the best hitting catchers in the game. Obviously, Pasquantino, if he gets back on the field, that's going to be a tough situation for the Guardians. So, a series with Kansas City still scares me a little bit, to be quite honest with you. But then there's also a guy like Tariq Skubal, and you cannot hit that guy no matter what you do. And Detroit's bullpen will shut you down as well. Their bullpen's not as good as the Guardians' bullpen, but it's up there in the league, and they've been really good as of late. But Detroit's also had a very soft end-of-the-year schedule. I'm not even into the whole probability thing. They talked about the Tigers having a 0.2% chance to make the playoffs. Please. We don't even know who's going to make the playoffs until the playoffs approach. No one thought Minnesota was going to collapse and Detroit was going to go on this magical run. That's fine. But Detroit was a good team overall at the beginning of the year. Everyone, I think, thought the Detroit Tigers could take that big step based on what they were building last year. Because last year they finished second in the division. They weren't a very good baseball team, but they were up and coming and on their way. And A.J. Hinch has experience with a championship program in the Houston Astros. Granted, it was a cheating scandal, obviously, but I'm just saying A.J. Hinch does have that pedigree to a degree, even though it was not authentic. So it's still in him. But the Detroit Tigers, they had a really good September and took off. So you have to look at the rest of the American League and the field of teams we have. Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see what takes place with the Detroit Tigers, how they end the year. I don't think anyone wants to see them. The Baltimore Orioles, I think, kind of might crash down to earth a little bit in the postseason. We didn't see them win a playoff series last year, and they had the number one overall seed. They got swept out. So will their playoff experience from last year motivate them to be better this year? We'll have to see. Kansas City, I don't think anyone thought the Royals were going to be in the mix either. So that's going to be another thing. They're essentially playing with house money. No one thought they were going to get this far, just like Detroit. But Detroit got hot at the right time. Kansas City was hot earlier on in the year. So that's another big thing to factor in. The Houston Astros have been there, done that. The New York Yankees have been there, done that. And the Cleveland Guardians have essentially been there and done that. They just haven't won the World Series yet. But just think about the number of times, and this is probably sickening to fans of other teams. This is sickening to fans of other teams. Think about all the times the New York Yankees, the Houston Astros, and the Cleveland Guardians / Indians have won the divisions over the last couple of seasons. More often than not, it's one of those three teams winning those divisions. More often than not. You obviously have some outliers here and there. The Yankees didn't make the playoffs last year, neither did the Guardians, but still. It's definitely going to be interesting to see what takes place in the American League side of things. Now, the National League side of things, the Los Angeles Dodgers, I think, probably have the best offense in baseball. One of the best offenses, I should say. I'd say they're a little bit. They're a two-man lineup, but they're built out a little bit better than a team like the New York Yankees. They do have some guys that can hit some balls outside of Shohei and Mookie Betts and some of those guys. You also look at the Milwaukee Brewers. That's a bullpen that I don't want to see at all if I'm in the National League, because they're like the Guardians of the National League. That bullpen will shut you down late in innings, and there's nothing you can do about it, and they're very well managed. So I want nothing to do with the Brewers. Philadelphia and the Phillies. I think the Phillies, they have a really good pitcher with Ranger Suarez, but Bryce Harper's really good too. I'm not so sure I'm sold on them winning a playoff series, though. They've been streaky at times this year. And then you have to look at teams like San Diego. Their bullpen's pretty good too. I don't know if I want to see them either if I'm in the National League. And then teams like Atlanta, New York, they're still fighting for playoff spots. I believe Arizona's in the mix too. And Arizona was in the World Series last year. They just made the tournament and got hot. Can they do it again? They may just turn the Jets on once October baseball begins. We'll have to see. All you have to do is make the dance and you have a chance. That's the big thing about Major League Baseball and why it's one of my favorite playoff formats in all major sports. That's going to be it for today's edition of Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. Tune in next week. We'll reflect on Week 4. We'll talk about the Major League Baseball playoff field. We'll have some more basketball news as the Cavaliers have Media Day on Monday. I'll react to some of that. Players like Evan Mobley, Donovan Mitchell, Jarrett Allen, and Darius Garland. My thoughts on what they have said and what we can expect from the Cavs going into this year. I'll discuss that. We'll react a little bit to Ohio State as well.